Hey, I'm Marshall, and welcome back to Gaming for Tokens. In this episode, we're going to be talking about sprites and how to import them, make them, how to use a Sprite Editor, that sort of thing. Probably going to be a shorter video. This is part of a run of videos that I'm going to do that are building to something. So I wanted to eventually go over a topic that's going to have a lot of moving parts, but I realized I hadn't covered a lot of those moving parts yet, and that includes UI and sprites and how the 2D system kind of works. So that's what we're going to be doing. This video is going to be sprites. Moving into the next couple videos are going to be all about like the Unity GUI system and how that works. GUI or GUI, however you want to say it. I'm going to say GUI a lot. Yeah. And then after that, we're going to go back into scripting some more. Well, the GUI stuff is going to have some scripting in it too, but then we're going to jump right back into scripting after that, like solidly, and then I'm going to cover the topic that I want to cover. So, yeah, a little bit of preamble before this thing, but sprites and how they're used. So, for the purposes of this video, I'm going to be implementing all of my sprites using the UI system. So in newer Unities, so Unity 5 or above, I believe. I forget which version of 5 the new UI stuff came in, but there's all these new UI tools that use the GUI system or GUI system that I'm going to be talking about in the next couple videos. We're going to be kind of using a little bit of that. So really all you need to know is that if you right-click over here in the hierarchy, or if you go to Game Object Create, or we'll get Game Object and then UI, because again, those are the same menu. If you go to the UI and then you drop down and you hit Image, that's what we're going to be using. When you do that, it is going to create a few things, and for some reason it never creates them aligned, and I don't understand that, but that's okay. It's going to create a canvas, an image, and an event system are the three things it's going to create. I should also say, this Unity scene is just a blank Unity scene. All I did was made the camera clear at a solid color and then changed the color to a darker color so that you could see my white sprites that I'm making on the darker background. Yeah. So sorry about not doing that ahead of time. I also clicked this little 2D button up here so that we can see everything in 2D and we get all the nice Sprite Editor handles and things like that, because we don't get that in the 3D cameras. See? Cool. So, yeah, right-click UI image is where we're going to start with. Is what we're going to start with. Now, this image, if you grab it, has no sprite in it. You'll see that it has a source image that's a sprite and a material as well. We're going to create a sprite from scratch. But first I'm going to show you kind of what you can do. Well, nah, I've created a bunch of sprites already for you, but I'll show them to you in Photoshop. So this is going to be a kind of a half Photoshop video as well, just for creating some really basic stuff. So this is one of the sprites that I've created. I've also created, this is for testing, so I can show you guys what stretching is going to do and how the Sprite Editor works in Unity. But to go with that, I've also created this weird shape, this circle, this pill shape, this capsule, and then this square. So starting off with the square, which I believe is Sprite 4, or Test 4 in our thing down here. Well, these are the different sprites that I've created in Photoshop, the ones I just showed you. But you'll see that they're coming in as all white. They're coming in as like a blank white texture. And if I show you what they look like in the Windows editor here, I have they're all PNGs except for there's two stretch tests. One's a target and one's a PNG, and I'll explain why I did that when I get there. But the PNGs all have built-in transparency, so you can kind of see the white line out here because it's kind of a bluey background. So they all have built-in transparency, but Unity doesn't by default recognize that because it doesn't have an alpha channel. So if you use the texture type texture, it won't actually recognize the alpha of the PNG. It's not entirely true. It just won't do it in the previews. It does recognize it. If I were to create like a new material and drag it in there and things like that, it would probably work, but it wouldn't work great. Typically, I use PNGs for my for all of my UI stuff, all my sprites, anything like that, I'm going to use a PNG for it, just because it's easier to iterate on. I don't have to deal with multiple channels on a texture. You'll know what I mean when we get into that part of it. I think I've talked a little bit about it in the texturing and materials video way back when, but I'm going to cover a little bit of that again today. Yeah, so this was test number 4 is our square. So a couple things that I'm going to do to a lot of these textures that are in here is I'm going to change them from texture to sprite, 2D, and UI. And I'm going to uncheck generate bitmaps. Typically you only want generate bitmaps if you're going to be seeing these things at a distance, so if they're going to be far away, right? Most of the time that you're dealing with sprites in a 3D game, which is going to be like UI assets and things like that, they're going to be right up against the camera, so you don't need to generate bitmaps on them. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set the max size from 2048 down to 512 because I know what the image size on all of my images are. I made them all 512 by 512. So going back into Unity, I can set my max size on these to 512. So it doesn't think that the file is bigger than it really is. If I hit apply, you'll see that that changes to look like what we want it to look like. So if I take this sprite, you'll also see that down here in the project window it has a little drop down, and there is a test for sprite inside of this like umbrella object, and I'll explain why that is in a little bit when we go over a sprite sheet. But for now we have a sprite, so we can take our image here and we can drag test04 into there. Now suddenly we have exactly what we expect. Yeah. So one interesting thing about sprites, one of the big benefits to it is you can do things with the stretching and the way that they collapse in on themselves and the way that they kind of are morphed when you change the size of them. So this kind of a sprite, for example, would be used for like the base of a checkbox maybe, or maybe it would be used as like the frame for a text window, or it would be used to frame another image inside of it, or whatever, right? It would be like in an MMO, they have those the buttons across the bottom, right, with the images that swap in and out, but all of them kind of have a frame around them. Well, some of them have a frame around them. So this could be the frame around that image, and then the image would be a separate image inside of, like within this bounds, you know? So, those are the different applications for something like this sprite. Very basic sprite. The point that I'm making there is that they would be different sizes. So if it was like a window for a text box, then maybe it would be a little wider than it would be long. So maybe it would be, whoa, come on, why did that make it so big? So maybe in like JRPGs and things like that, you end up with this text box that is down at the bottom of the screen, like this guy down here. And I will actually select my camera and make it actually black so that we can see where the camera bounds are. That makes it much easier. Cool. Boop, and then we increase the width some more, and we make it like an actual number instead of some crappy number. Great. So then we end up with this. Well, this doesn't look very good because like the ends are all stretched out. I added a small fade, like a small it's an inner glow in Photoshop, but I added a little glow to these edges on the inside. So you can see that that's getting all gross and stretched out, and like the lines on the right are thicker than the lines on the top. It looks not very good, right? There's a way to fix this. So if you grab the sprite up at the base level, not this guy, but this one, and you hit the Sprite Editor button here, it'll open a new window that looks like this. And this lets you manipulate your sprites. In the case of a sheet, which I'll show you in a bit, you can actually split the sheet up into multiple sprites. But in the case of these sprites, including a singular sprite, you have these green little boxes that you can drag around, and you can effectively what you're doing is you're setting the like safe zone of your sprite, I think is what they call it. Essentially what you're doing is you're setting areas to only be stretched in the direction that they should be stretched in. It's kind of complicated to describe, but just follow along with me here and you'll be able to kind of discern what happens in the end. So I'm going to drag this down, and you'll see that the number down here on the bottom changes. You have a border, a left, right, top, and bottom. And the border for the top, I want to make sure that I get within that fade. I want to encompass the entire fade by this green line here. So I want to go about there, which is about 40. So I want to set all of the edges to 40. That's going to move all of these green lines in that many pixels, or well, that many units. Which I didn't really talk about the units over here on the pixels per unit. So there are 512 pixels in this image, and there is now going to be 100 pixels per unit. So that means that this is actually going to be 51.2 units in the world. Now if I change that to 512, that means that this entire texture is only going to be 1 unit long in the real world. What that means is like a unit in Unity is about a meter, right? So that means that if I were to drag this image directly into Unity, it would be about 1 meter by 1 meter. If this is set to 512. If I make it 5,120, then that means that it's going to be, when I drag it in, it's going to be a centimeter by a centimeter. So this is a way for you to control the size of your images when you drag them in, and also what all these units refer to. So like the Sprite Editor in here, this being 40, 40, 40, 40, means that this is 40 units in, because this is 100 units. The whole thing is 512 units. 51.2 units across. Right? That can't be right. Pixels per unit. Yeah. But then it's 40. Weird. My math is off somewhere. But basically, this pixels per unit correlates to the... Maybe this is pixels. Maybe if I set this to 512. Oh. Hang on. I just had a thought. Yeah, okay, so these are actually... the border is pixels. My bad. I just learned a thing. Hey, look at that. I never knew what these were. It doesn't really matter what they are as long as you know. Yeah, I know that sounds awful, but it's true. Like, as long as you can visually see what's going on, and as long as, like, in my opinion, that they're nice round numbers that are easily edited, that match up with your objects in Photoshop. Like, for example, I know that the fade on this is actually 30 pixels because I set it in Photoshop. So I just have to compensate for this gap here, which I don't know what it is in Photoshop. I'm assuming it's around 10 pixels or so. So 10 plus 30 equals 40. So I could probably increase this to 45 if I wanted to be safe, but, you know, I can do whatever I want to do with that. Anyway, point is, these are pixels, but then this is a scalar for how many pixels per unit it translates to in the real world in the game. In the real world in the game. You know what I mean. So anyway, once you hit the apply button up here, so again, if I make a change and then I make a change back, you'll have these revert and apply buttons. If you hit apply, that actually applies this border zone or the safe zone to the sprite. So now the sprite knows what its like border bounds are. Something that I've noticed is that Unity doesn't actually live update the image when you do that. So if you ever edit your sprites, you're going to have to like reapply or reinitialize your images in the scene. So for example, I think this might work. I've never actually tried this. So this is Sprite Testing. So if I reload the scene, yeah, save. Yeah, okay, so reloading the scene didn't do anything, but I know that if I drag the sprite into here, it will update. So you'll see now that when I increase the width of the thing, the borders are the same. That's very, very useful. Now this is only up to a certain degree, right? Like if I decrease this to like 20, you'll start to see that it starts to stretch. It's only going to get you so far, but it'll get you pretty far. I believe it'll go, well, we set it to 45. So if I go to 90 to 90, I think is as far as it will go. Because again, we set the safe zone, the border, to be 45 in, off the sides. So effectively this corner, this corner, this corner, and this corner are all 45 by 45 right now, because this is a 90 across by 90 across. That makes it all of this safe zone at the moment. But if we go lower than that, if we say this is 80, then you'll see that right here, these are a little bit thinner than this, because we're starting to encroach in on that safe zone, and it's trying to gracefully handle it, but it can't really. Yeah. So anyway, this is an easy way to create sprites that are nice and scalable and easy to use. So this is what you'd use for like a generic sprite, maybe like for a text box. But you could also use the same sprite for, say, a checkbox, or like if you wanted to duplicate this, raise it up a little bit, decrease the height and the width, as long as this is above 90, remember, so 90 is your minimum here. Now you can have like a little name box above it that is the exact same texture, so it's easy to update, you know, if you wanted to do that. So if you like wanted to say add a pattern instead, or whatever you wanted, you can just edit it once and then it'll reflect everywhere. Yeah, so that's the basic elements of editing a sprite. So then we're gonna start to get into some weird stuff. I'm gonna go ahead and set the render settings, or the import settings, on all of these guys again, which again was Sprite 2D and no bitmaps and 512. And you can do that, by the way. You can set multiple textures at the same time if you grab all of them. So now we have all of our sprites. And I'm going to, again, UI image. And you'll notice that when you create a new image like that, it'll actually automatically parent it to the canvas object. The canvas object is kind of the umbrella object for UI assets, which again, I'll talk about that in a future video. For now, you want to make sure that all of your images are under your canvas. Otherwise, it's not going to be fun times. It's not going to behave the way you expect it to. The size of the images won't be right. The scaling will be all weird. It'll mess with the image a lot. Anyway, so I'm going to drag in my scale test, and I'll show you guys more of an in-depth idea of, or a more in-depth example of how this stretching works. So again, we haven't set anything in the Sprite Editor yet, so if we say we mess with this and we mess with this, you'll see that certain things become stretched as they are labeled. So like these are thin and these are fat, and this is thin and kind of wide. But if we go back to our stretch test here, and we go into our Sprite Editor, and we again drag down one of these green things to below the stretch text there, which is about 50, and we bring it all in 50, and we hit apply, and then we also update our image. I wish Unity did this automatically, but you know, you can only ask so much. You'll notice that it changes quite a bit for the worse, and you'll notice that 100 isn't enough. What I have found with messing with this image is 512 by 512 is the actual image resolution, and that's what the size that it needs to not be stretched at all. Just I got that through like experimentation, but also knowing that it's a 512 texture and that it's at 100 pixels per unit and all that stuff. So this is a good size for this image that will show that it is not stretched. Now if I start decreasing the width of it, you'll see that certain things are stretched and certain things aren't. So the top and bottom stretched text is stretched, and the middle one is stretched, but the ones on the side are not, because the ones on the side are now in that safe zone of the left and the right area, right? They're like, if you look over here on the image example, you'll see little dotted lines that represent where the safe zones are, or where the border zones are. So you'll see that like the left and right stretched are well within the borders defined by the Sprite Editor. So they're not going to be stretched horizontally when we stretch the image horizontally. But the bit in the middle is not in the border zone, so it is going to be stretched. And these, the ones on the top and bottom, are not in the left and right border zones, so they're going to be stretched. But if we take that image and we decrease its height, you'll see that the stretch on the left and right, because they're not in the top and bottom border zones, do get stretched. So that's kind of how you can visualize what is and isn't stretched and how that's being stretched. Typically, you won't put text in your sprite. You'll do text another way. You'll usually do like a UI text inside of this, and then you can do your own thing with this and say, hey, UI text, exclamation point, and we'll make it white so you can see it. Yeah, UI text. And then you can actually just take this image and you can, decrease the width all you want, and it doesn't actually mess with the text. But anyway, again, I will talk about all the UI stuff in a later video. But yeah, hopefully this image helps you visualize kind of how things get stretched and how they don't get stretched sometimes. But yeah, so you'll see that even if this is at 300 by 300, it's still like these are a little bit squished because it wants to be a 512 by 512 or bigger. And we can change that again by grabbing the stretch test object and changing the pixels per unit and all that stuff. Ideally, you make your sprite images the resolution you want them to be in game, and then you just set this to 1 or 512 or 1024 or whatever you want it to be. So if I set this to 1024 and hit apply, the object would be all weird looking. But you could then say this is 100 by 100. Well, I don't know. It's a mess. 10 by 10? Oh, I think I know what it is. 20 by 20. Oh, I think it's doing 16s, isn't it? So it'd have to be 16 by 16 to be, or something like that. 32 by 32. Yeah, so you gotta be careful with that because it'll mess up really fast if you start doing things to it that are weird with the numbers, right? Anyway, I've spent way too much time on that, I think. Yeah, this is already a 20-minute video. Ugh, jeez. All right, cool. So, some of the questions that you might have with doing these sprites like this are, how would you handle this kind of a shape, right? Oh yeah, by the way, if you drag and drop your objects in here like this, they won't actually be images for the UI. They'll be sprite objects, which isn't what you want. So again, use UI, image, and then drag your sprite into that instead, just for this demo for now. Yeah. So this sprite, for example, is a rectangular shape. So you're going to want the width on this to be double of whatever the height is, and then you'll get a squared up image. You'll get a not stretched image. But say that we wanted to make this wider, but we didn't want to cause any nasty scaling. Well, we can do that. We can open up the Sprite Editor, and knowing what we know, if we want to make things wider and we don't want things to stretch, we basically have to pull these green lines in far enough that anything that could look compressed won't be compressed. And you might initially think that here would be fine, right? We can just bring this in 30, and then we can bring it in 30 from the right, and we hit apply, and then we can update our image again with this sprite. And then when we increase the width of this, oh, it still stretches because this part here isn't in, these parts here aren't in the left-right part for the border. So what we have to do is actually take this part and drag it way into here. So that's 150, and then we also have to go 150 in from the other side. Then if we take this and drag it in here. Oh, come on. Okay, yeah, we're starting to see it a little bit here. 512 by 1024. Yeah, and then as we increase this, you'll see that these parts don't actually stretch anymore, but the part in the middle does. So it's kind of a weird thing there. But we want to do more than that, right? Because we may want to stretch it the other direction as well. So we're going to drag these green lines into here, and that's going to be 90, and this is also going to be 90. And then we will end up with our scalable texture, or our scalable sprite that is, for better or worse, good at what we tell it to be. So the height now will scale as well. The width will scale. But ideally, you don't have that. You don't have in-cuts like this on your sprite that are that deep, that are that like detailed. And by detailed, I mean like this curve. You want to make sure that that is not interrupted, that it's not stretched at all, because it'll be very noticeable. And like these lines are the same width as these lines, things like that. It makes it a pain to use this sprite because of all of those things. And then when you start stretching it, it doesn't look very good in my opinion anyway, because when you get a sprite that looks like this, it just looks weird. But yeah, so that's a way to handle like a weird sprite undercut, or an undercut sprite, I guess is what I want to call that. So the next one is, what about a circle? How do you handle a circle? If I wanted to make a circle wide, how would I make this not stretch? And I believe the answer is you don't. Which is not the answer that you want to hear, I think. But, I mean, the best thing I could think of is by taking this and actually setting it to like 256 by 256, and then doing the same thing like that, so that basically all of these are, the entire image is a border, therefore none of it will be stretched. I don't know if this is going to work. I haven't actually ever done this before. It kind of works, doesn't it? I mean, because the whole thing is a border, so no matter what, no matter what direction you stretch it, it's going to be stretched, because that's just how that works, right? Like, it stretches a little more gracefully, but not a whole lot more. Your best bet, in my opinion, is to go with a capsule. So you drag the capsule in here, and you go to the Sprite Editor for the capsule, and then you say, like, set this to the center of the capsule width, and then you drag this down to, like, I don't know, 60 to 60. You apply that. Now this will actually scale the way that you expect it to. Boop. I know it looks like crap. Give it a minute. 512 by 512. So now we have a circle, right? But if we actually increase the width on this, it'll actually become a not circle. It'll become a capsule, which is exactly what you would effectively want from stretching out that circle. And likewise, we can stretch it like that. It doesn't look great because again, the top border here. Well, actually, let's see if we can fix that. Let's go in here to the Sprite Editor and set this to actually be 256 by 256. And we hit apply, and we update this guy to that. Yeah, I mean, it scales a little better, not very much, but yeah, but essentially, you kind of see what's going on. If you set this to 500 by 1000, it'll look like a capsule, but if you set it to 500 by 500, it'll look like a circle. So you kind of get two images out of one if you do a capsule like that. I think that you would actually get a better image if instead of doing a capsule, you actually just made it a like kind of a two-way capsule. So you made like this radius and this radius and this radius, but you added this line to the center as well. So you made it like a very, very a square with big rounded corners. Then you can get away with doing a capsule, a circle, and a rounded corner square all in the same sprite. And that way you could, yeah, you can utilize more, you can get more sprites out of one sprite, which is better for performance, better for usability, better for all that stuff. Yeah, that's kind of my long-winded explanation there. Hopefully that makes sprites make sense. I don't even know if this is necessarily a requested thing, but it is going to be necessary for understanding how the UI system interprets images and how they interpret their visuals, right? Because we need to know how this works to be able to interface with like how a button works, because a button is a sprite with text and a bunch of code hooked up to it. So this is the sprite part of it. And you may have noticed that I just scaled this image down and the width didn't change. So actually, yeah, if we change this to like 0.25 scale, and then we can actually like edit the image to be 1000 by 500, and it'll actually fit on the screen down here because it's scaled down. But that's something that we probably want to. You can take, if you're constantly scaling this down to 0.25, you can actually just take the the pixels per unit and just set it to 25 and hit apply. And now when you have this image, you can set this to 1, 1, 1, and then you can set this to, you know, things other than 1,500, so like 100 by 50. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. I feel like this should be working and it's not. So I'm not sure what's going on there. 1,000 by... Come on. Give me something here. God, I sometimes I hate the sprite system because every time it feels like every time I mess with this thing, everything breaks. But yeah, my advice is just to make things at the image resolution that you want them to be at on screen, and then just like you can do 1 and 0.5, and then you'll have a circle because that's as small as it can get. Sometimes Unity works the way that I want it to, and sometimes it doesn't, I guess. But yeah, Sprites, they're kind of a pain, but when you do it, when you do things right with them, they're fun to work with, they're fun to mess with. And I didn't even talk about a Sprite Sheet. Geez, what am I doing? Alright, so I have this Sprite Sheet of UI icons. I'm going to reset the import settings on them. And it comes in again as a white texture. This image, I believe, is a PNG. It's a Targa. Okay, it's a TGA. So the difference between a Targa and a PNG is that one of them... Here, I'm going to open up Photoshop. A Targa has an alpha channel, which is right here, but a PNG doesn't. So effectively, what I've been doing to convert all of these into PNGs, because that's kind of how I work, is I work like a Targa, but then I convert it to a PNG, is I will take all of these, I will duplicate them, which I have a hotkey for, but you know, you can right-click, duplicate layer, hit OK, and then I will merge them. So you can right-click and hit merge, or you can hit Control E. I select all, so Control A, Control C for copy, and then I come over here to the alpha channel, or if there isn't one, we'll pretend there isn't one. You hit New down here on the bottom, and it'll create an alpha channel, and then I hit Control V for paste, and that actually gives me my alpha channel. Interesting property of alpha channels is that you can use them as a selection. So just like how you can come over here and hold Control and click the image of the layer and get a selection for that layer, you can do the same thing for an alpha channel, but it's a black-white selection. So it'll actually select all of the pixels that are white, and it'll select the transparency of the white. So this like little bit of fade here will be a transparent selection. So then you can come back in here and you can create a new layer. You can fill it white, because I'm using all white, right? So now I have this, which is a compressed layer, so it's all one layer. That is the sprite that I made. It's not 3 layers and an alpha channel, all that stuff. I can turn off my background, and I can save this out as a PNG. But alternatively, if you wanted to deal with Targas, which is fine if you do, they're not... I see deal with like it's a problem. It's not a problem. A lot of people use Targas. I use Targas for most of my textures, but I don't use them for my UI stuff just because I like having the transparency built into the base texture. But if you wanted to use a Targa, you just have to make sure that alpha channel is here. Once it's here, you just leave all your layers checked, and then you save it out as a Targa. When you save it out as a Targa, you want to make sure that... So this is test 04. Oh! Oops. Hang on. Let me try that again. So... when you save it out, you want to make sure that you check alpha channels and you hit save, and then you want to make sure that it's checked to 32-bit, because only 32-bit textures can have alpha channels. It's just a thing. And then you hit OK. And then when you come into Unity, you'll see that there's a new test 04. It's a black texture because it, again, this Unity will recognize that it is a texture, but it will not recognize that it has alpha until you tell it to. So, if I want to, I can say it's a Sprite 2D, no bitmaps, it's 512, just like we've been doing, hit apply, and then it'll automatically recognize that alpha channel in the Targa. Point of advice though, I'm going to reset this. There's no reason to have any of these black pixels in for a targa. The only reason that you'd want the black there is if you're going to see the black. So what I usually do instead is I will create a new layer and I'll fill it white, and then I'll save that out as a targa. And the reason why I do that is because any kind of compression that is done to this image, any kind of like in-engine stuff that like makes it lower resolution for performance reasons, will make those black pixels bleed into that alpha channel, and it makes it not look as good. So instead, I will use an all-white targa with the alpha channel, which, by the way, you can toggle with this little like colored button here. It looks like 3 bars of color, RGB. You can toggle that to go to the alpha channel. So I now have an all-white image with this alpha channel, so no matter how much this thing gets compressed or mip-mapped or whatever, even though we're not mip-mapping it, I understand. But if it gets compressed at all, it's going to be white pixels bleeding into the already white space, and you're not going to see that compression as much. Also, personally, I think that if you have a black background when you turn it into a sprite, some of that, the black pixels bleed into the white pixels, and it makes it kind of a gray instead of a white, which is, if you want the white, then you have white. If you do it this way. So anyway, yeah, that's kind of my spiel on that. So yeah, kind of going over this again, I generally create the layers and then I will flatten them into a single layer if I can, and then I'll export as a PNG using the alpha channel as like a selection mask in kind of a weird way. If you know anything about Photoshop, this is all going to kind of come to you like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Or you'll think that I'm crazy and I should do it a different way. Or I will just bake it all in like this. I'll fill it whatever color I want. Typically, if it's like a multicolored thing, then I will I'll come in here with like a brush and, you know, whatever colors I'm using with a hardness maybe, and I'll like fill in the color around the object to be whatever colors that I'm using around that object. That way, like, I don't have... Again, the thing that I'm trying to solve here... God, this is garish. The thing I'm trying to solve here is the bleed from the compression, right? So I basically just want it to... I want it to behave like I would expect it to behave. I want it to look like a white texture if I want it to be a white texture, or a red texture, or a purple texture, or whatever. I want it to look like that. I don't want it to like bleed together and have like this weird mishmash of colors because it's lower resolution. I want to try to avoid that as much as possible, right? So, yeah. Hopefully this was helpful. We're going to be talking about more GUI stuff in the next video, or GUI stuff in the next video. The next video, it's going to be talking about what the hell all the GUI stuff is, and why you might want to use it, and how you make all of it, and how you hook up to all of it, and what the event system is, and the input module, and how you hook it up to a camera, and all that jazz. Maybe it'll be a two-parter. The episode after that will be how to use them, so how you actually like can dive in and start setting variables on them, and like hooking them up to code, and get things out of them. Yeah. Eventually, I want to talk about static classes, because I think you guys need to know about static classes. Static classes have been my my boon lately. They've been the thing that has been helping me out quite a bit. But yeah, hopefully this was helpful, and it's good to be back making videos again. I'm hopefully going to make a series of videos today or tomorrow, and I'm going to kind of edit all of them and upload them throughout the week, so I'll have like a small backlog. Yeah. No promises, though, as usual with me. I feel really bad about not uploading, but, you know, it is what it is. Life happens. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.